All right, let's begin. Appreciate your being here. As I said last week, it's very encouraged when you call people to do things and they do it, and to be able to have this kind of interaction is very helpful to me, as I hope it is for you. Thanks to Kathy, we are now online. You can access by. You have to become a member to get on.
Kind of join them in, yeah.
You have to have the link.
Yeah, and you can invite people. And I just went through my list of friends, and one of them is a youth back from when he was in high school back in 1,000 years ago. He's retired now, and he joined the group.
All right.
You might be interested in what Pastor Keith is saying today.
So really be intelligent today because it's a growing audience. We want to in the thousands by the end. I would sort of apologize that I conned you on the first week where you only had, in 2 days, you had to read 17 verses. Now you're reading a chapter at a time. Oh my gosh. And some of those chapters are a page long. But it means you're taking bigger gulps than of it. And what that does, it kind of forces you to look wider rather than, we could spend 2 sessions on the first 17 verses. We could almost do that with every portion of this, but Paul writes in groupings, and that's how it's divided.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Please do. And now, please rise for the. Okay. There were a couple of words that came up that I thought we ought to look at, and I'm going to try to remember what all of them were. In this reading, you talked about wisdom a lot, right? Yeah. Greek word is Sophia, wisdom. The reason this is important to this writing and important to us is because it so dominates Paul's writings. It's the principal thing that he is having to deal with in the converts that are not from Judaism, which makes up the bulk of his congregations. They have a different view of the world. And what they hold up as being the best thing is wisdom. And as the commentator was talking about it, to try to figure out how people who could, stand up and like a great orator, share great wisdoms with you and leave you spellbound, those people were regarded in that culture the way we treat movie stars and sports heroes. And you will notice that we go to them for wisdom too now, although one wonders why. But
yes,
when Paul talks about being plain spoken and simple-minded, he's not saying I'm not educated. He's not saying that the people that he's speaking to have to be treated like children. He's saying you are used to this. As a matter of fact, most of the things dealt with in our readings for this week have to do with what was Apollos' virtue? He could talk, and boy, he made them real complex things sound real simple and obvious. Boy, I'd just like to hear more of him. Okay, so where is your attachment? What's your affection? What's your commitment? It's to hearing Apollos. Oh, and guess who's coming to town? So-and-so. See? It kind of like in modern Christians, it's like who's the next evangelist you're going to go see perform or on TV or, what Paul wants to do is say, no, the truth that I have to give you, the message, the charisma, is not this. The charisma comes directly to us through Jesus Christ. And what does Paul say that he came to tell them? I was resolved to know nothing but Christ and him crucified. Not raised, crucified. And he talks about how that whole idea, the cross, in the eyes of the Greeks was what? Foolishness. Explain, please. How do you understand that? How is the cross foolishness?
You get killed.
Well, yeah.
Killed, hung up there and humiliated.
For the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the whole thing about crucifixion that was supposed to make it so effective?
It was very public.
Yes, it was a spectacle of suffering death. And it was a demonstration, we have total power over you. See you writhing up there, begging mama. Okay. That is what the Greeks understand. So when I talk to you about the cross, it sounds like foolishness. But what Paul is trying to do in this section, indeed he'll do it consistently through the letter and all of his writing, is to say this is the new way you need to see the world. That God in Christ was demonstrating how things are to be, not as you in all of your wisdom think they are. Is there any of this in the Bible? Did you know there was going to be a pop quiz? Well, this is the pop quiz.
Proverbs.
What? Proverbs, yes. Which is a collection of wisdom. And when you're reading Proverbs, what are you reading? Words. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to get that one off. You just preempted.
So mad.
Yeah, you didn't know that. Something new every day, yes. Get brighter and brighter.
Yeah.
Beam me up, Scotty. There's
Yeah.
the intelligent life here. Okay.
But I think about train up a child.
Yeah.
That's proper.
Yeah. In a very simplistic form, and I stress that, but that's kind of where I get in philosophy. Wisdom is what has come to be understood as obvious knowledge. Train up a child in the way that they should go, and they will not depart therefrom, unless you have a child. Give me another proverb that's so obvious, that's even more obvious than that. A stitch in saves. What's the wisdom? What's the point?
Fix it early.
Yeah, if you don't fix the tear early, you'll be replacing the pants. Yeah. That's kind of a hint of what wisdom literature was like. It is not necessarily, you will notice, godly. Okay? That what the Bible tends to talk about is how God has revealed to us what is true. What wisdom is like is what, if we all just think about it, we'll come to the same conclusion. If, for example, you were looking to buy a house and you see water residue on the wall, what do you know you should wonder about? What?
And do I have insurance?
Yes. Is that the 100-year flood or the last one in the decade? Wisdom literature, and it becomes, how it became almost a religion, was the idea that, if we just all thought about this, we could come up with the right answer. We could understand. We're not all that dumb. Well, some of you are, but collectively, and if we got these together and thought about them, think how wise we could become and how much better the world would be. I don't have any real problem with that, but what's missing?
Christ.
Yeah, God is not involved. It's collected human knowledge. See? Okay, so what Paul is saying is, you have exalted this wisdom to the point where it's more than a way of life. It's almost a religion. It was the Greeks' contribution to the world. What do you think of when the great thinkers, right? Okay, it is the power of the human mind to overcome all, and we will make a perfect world. And there's been no problem since then. Well, a few hiccups along the line, but no real problems. So what Paul says is that wisdom is blinding you to the truth of God. And the best way to understand God is to look at Christ on the cross. it's totally foolish. You are right. It does not make sense. You're right. It looks like defeat. You're right. It looks like all the power, if whoever has the power, has it all. So what he's got them to trying to make them understand is, it is in working through that keyhole of the cross that you begin to understand how God is working. Are you kind of with me now? I see a lot of stunned faces, but then you haven't eaten, so I understand. Okay, all right. With that in mind, what issues did you want to raise in the first 5 chapters of 1 Corinthians?
The stuff about judging others. Chapter 4, we're not to judge.
Yeah, and then we get to chapter 5.
And then chapter 5, we're throwing them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and Paul is progressing through these issues, and he doesn't intend these chapters to be taken separately. I'm talking to you about your problem, I'm going to talk to you about your problem. There is to be an evolving thought here. So we shouldn't, if we see chapter 5 as being a contradiction to chapter 4, then there is an issue. We need to examine it. So how do you follow the rule, do not judge others, and then we deal with this guy in chapter 5? Thoughts?
I think it's what you said in the sermon. What makes this unique is for the church at Corinth. They are the supreme example. And for them to allow, and the whole thing of their misunderstanding of grace. Well, because I've been forgiven, I could just go and do whatever. And so he can do whatever, and we're just, but I'm okay. Me and God, we're okay. So, and then, but what that example is, I mean, how do you then ever get to the story of the cross? Because people are looking at you and they'll, anyway.
I mean, I kind of look at it as chapter 4, we shouldn't be holier than thou judging others.
Right.
But if you're going to be wearing the Christian t-shirt and doing brand marketing here,
Right.
and you're flaunting something that's inconsistent with Jesus and with God, then, and brotherly love, I should be guiding you and encouraging correction. And if you're going to be rebellious, I don't know, maybe I got to throw you out, Betsy, I don't know.
Yeah, helping keep each other accountable.
Right.
Those things.
Because others that aren't Christians, I mean, we all know them, oh, I'm not going to go to church because of all the hypocrisy they see and all this other stuff going on, and it's kind of like chapter 5 maybe.
Yeah.
Do they not understand? That's why we come.
Yeah, but it's one thing to sin, another thing to flaunt it, I guess, I don't know.
Well, and I don't know that we run into, well, I don't know, maybe you do, examples of people flaunting grace. That kind of, you have the deal of the religious tests of faith. You believe? Oh, really? There's the snakes. Put your hand in. Because, if you got faith, won't kill you. Oh, too bad you don't have faith. It's a witch. She sinks. No, she floats. Which is it that a witch does? When people start evaluating others, we're assuming that we have either the right or the insight to know what's happening with them. We never like to be the one being judged. We delight in evaluating others, right? So Is the solution then to do no such evaluations? I mean, how does anybody, what if a person doesn't know what's right and what's wrong? It used to gall me when somebody would walk into church with their baseball cap on, and I'm not talking about a woman. You know, but did their mother not raise them right? You know, and then I realized their mother didn't raise them at all, evidently, you know, and they're here. You know, I mean,
We have to have them learn, I mean,
Yeah.
or we're not doing our part, I guess, you know, if we don't. But I think that is a fine line. Because when you point one finger, how many are pointing back at yourself,
yeah.
you know?
Well, and that's, when you get to 5, I think what's unusual about that, and what Paul says is, what's happening here in your church would make the sailors down at the saloon blush. Right? I mean, this is not something where a person doesn't know, oh, should I not do it? Did I use the wrong fork? You know, I mean, we're not in that class of behavior. But still, in the end, some judging is done.
Well, if you want to help save someone, I guess you know. I mean, I'm not saying we save them, but if we don't lead them here into the word, into the truth.
But this whole Paul thing, I mean, not that there might not have been bigger sinners than him, but, you know, he needed a lot of forgiving. He killed a lot of people, Stephen. But then, all of a sudden, he has the grace to write these kind of things. And I think sometimes when things happen to us, and you get labeled, that it's hard to function when you know everybody is thinking about what you did. And I mean, could we all just, Christ come down on us? And,
Yeah, I mean, once we apply a label to somebody,
yes.
I mean, I once knew a teacher, she's sitting over there, and, you know, one of the things maybe that most gets in the way of kids growing is the teacher's lounge, where the teachers share what's wrong with, oh, you're getting John next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had him and I learned about it. And the kid never has a chance because, well, I've had it with you. I know who you are and what you're like. You know, you see that in families, the last born. You know, oh, you're Bill's brother. Yeah, well, he was a great student.
So it should have never had a chance, fella.
Yeah, they were watched close.
But those, what, you say they're small, they did not end up being smaller, they wouldn't be that significant. When we know that's true in how we just treat each other generally, how much more when we start dealing with people's spiritual life, values, level. Most of us are not real sure of those things, about our spiritual well-being. And, you know, why do grown men tend not to come to these kind of groups? Because they don't know the Bible and they don't want to admit it. They don't want to be a fool. Women evidently just don't care.
Sting.
But you know,
If they'd be too smart, they marry men.
but I found that to be a universal truth, and it is not that they aren't curious, but you know, the worst thing is I'll go and they'll ask a question and I'll be embarrassed. Well then, what's the responsibility of the church to that? Not try to make sure that that doesn't happen to anyone and try to find ways to communicate that.
Oh, and things the church does.
Yeah.
Someone has not been there for a long time,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they show up. Oh my gosh, it's gonna fall in.
Mark sure done a lot.
Yeah. Gonna see them next week. I mean,
Yeah, that's- yeah.
we do things without
We don't
thinking.
think.
Well, and, you know, as long as we're drifting from topic, let's just run away from it. Awards programs. Let's honor all the kids who make straight A's, probably without trying. What about the kid who always made F's and made a D minus? He probably made more progress than anybody in that school. That's not the way our system is. You know, we went from awards only to winners to everybody gets a trophy. So now nothing matters, you know? I understand the reason to get away from that, but at the same time, where's the incentives, where's the initiatives, where's the recognition? You know, I just,
Because life's not fair, dang it.
yeah.
So in the church, so and I keep going back to somewhere in the Gospels where Jesus, I mean, the thing we always know, wherever two or more are gathered, I will be among you, which is not about we're just all together. It was because there was a problem in the church.
Right,
Or the
right.
brotherhood, or the sisterhood, or whatever. And so it's like, take somebody with you. All right, so is that not what the church, the responsibility is, but to be able to do that in love and to have a conversation, you know, this is really bothering me, you know, about your behavior or whatever.
Yeah,
And
And-
sometimes it will work and sometimes it will not.
Right.
But then that's not, we had a situation with a family one time whose children in church, and the dad loved to play with the 4-year-old in the middle of the worship service. Where nobody in the church could hear the sermon. And finally, after so long, 2 of the sweet ladies in the church who were very loving decided to go talk to them about, we could go to the nursery or you could go out here, or you could do it, and they just got offended and left. That was their choice. You know, the church said, this is an issue that needs to be dealt with because of how it's affecting the community. And so this is affecting the community, we need to find a way. And none of us ever want to be the person who has to go deal with that. So it's easier just to overlook it.
and see, the layers in that, you know, the first is we were glad that the family was there. They were not members, they were newcomers, you know, and they had children, you know. It was neat to see a dad that was so delighted to be with the child, you know. I thought God gave us wives so he could give her the kids, you know. It's the way I did it, so it worked perfectly. But then there was behavior that affected, I mean, you know, I'm up front and I'm looking at people going, you know, I mean, it was disrupting a worship. And finally, 2 ladies said, we don't want to do this, but we have to do it for everybody's sake. And it's obvious Dad wasn't getting anything out of the service. He was there enjoying the kid, you know. So they went, and I'm sure, and was concerned, you know, didn't say this is wrong, presented alternatives. Did you know that? You know, we would love to, you know, but I choose to be offended by that and leave. And you know, because they didn't change their behavior and immediately become model members, then it's another example of don't go there, you know? The problem in all of this is who sets the standards? See, here's the deal about Paul. There isn't anybody else. There's nothing to turn to. Nothing's been written. You know, Paul came and taught them. A church was started. Some of these others came and evidently preached and so forth and so on. But they were totally dependent. You have all sorts of resources to go to. What is right and wrong? Then churches organize, and as Paul is doing, there are some things you should do in communion and not do. We'll get to that in chapter 11, and we're still mindful of that. Then it becomes institutional. Ever been to a Catholic church and found yourself always in the wrong posture? You're standing when they're kneeling, you're sitting when they're standing, and there's a right and wrong behavior, and you're not fitting, and you feel out of place, and people are looking at you like, my God, you must be a Protestant. And it gets in so much way that becomes what you're thinking about rather than the service that brought you there. And I didn't put this in the sermon, probably because by then I was so confused. What happens if a church were to say, okay, what are the behaviors that are not acceptable? I mean, Paul says this is so obvious. What would that be for us? It is interesting how that list tends to either get very large, we're always adding things on, or stays so small because that'll never happen here. Okay, right? Yeah. We'll take a firm stand if, but.
Well, I think that's the hard part, because this was a letter to a specific church in a specific time and all this, but what are we to take from that? What behaviors are we to, because, society changed. What is sexual immorality today? Everybody lives together before marriage. Everybody gets divorced 3-4 times. Everybody, that's just normal now, but how do we apply this specific letter to this specific group of people to our knowledge is the tough part.
That's the question. And it is, and maybe we ought to start in the same way that Paul did. Let's just talk about us here, rather than talking about all Christians everywhere. We're not all Christians and we're not everywhere, but we are here. So what behavior here do we expect? And how do we present ourselves to the community? I think as a congregation, you are highly regarded in this community. I don't know how well you individually are known in the community as being a part of this church. So does your behavior apart from the church reflect the church? Again, if you were wearing the Russellville t-shirt, if you're sitting there wearing the brand, then you are representing it. If you're just, early on I went down to the annex, church annex, down Harrison Street, with Tim, and it was right at lunchtime, so all these people are coming in, so he was calling people over, that's so-and-so and that's so. Well, it's the husbands of all the guys who don't come here, whose wives do. They're all on the roll. You can start rattling off names, which I thought, was neat, and they were, good to know. I heard you were here. I haven't seen them. I think I saw one of them at Christmas Eve. Yeah. But how does our impact on those outside the church? How do we address that? I'll tell you one example of that, and it's not about Russellville. The whole thing that the extreme right evangelical wing of Christianity is making right now is absolutely ensuring that no one who currently doesn't go to church will ever go to church. It is so judgmental, it is so negative, it is so vicious that it's like, forget you. And everyone who has the label Christian is branded the same. That is not fair response, but it is what's happening. They're operating on conviction. What they don't realize is how negative it is. How, when you polarize any issue, you intensify opposition, right? Yeah. Let's draw a line and make a decision, rather than, well, I don't know what the other is. how do you decide anything without deciding? But same things happen in church. Churches have structures, structures have opinions, they take stands, and that polarizes the church, right? It's one of the reasons we have so many denominations. I think it's fair to say every denomination in this country has splinter groups, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Why? Because in our sense of freedom of religion, we've taken that to extremes. So if you don't like what this church is doing, you can go up the road there to Browns Valley, and there are 2 churches there you can choose from. If you don't like that, you start your own. At what point does that become just total religious anarchy? Have you ever gone to worship someplace and communion was being offered and you found out you weren't supposed to take it?
Catholic Church.
Yep. How's that make you
Christ.
feel? Huh?
Church of Christ.
Yep, 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 yep. Or it is, at one place, you have a certain standing and regard. In another congregation, it's Paul, in the case of the situation in chapter 5, Paul is pretty certain that this is not an issue that has to be discussed. Everybody knows it's wrong. A lot of the other issues are obviously not obvious, or he wouldn't have to write it so specifically. The other thing that, yes, these people were coming from nowhere. There had never been Christians before Paul showed up. Now they are called to a whole different way of living. And what do you bring to that? You bring what you knew, everything.
Trying to bring structure and guidelines.
Oh, yeah. The way you had learned to live life and treat others and regard the world. That now suddenly you're having to learn a different way. We do that through relational experiences like church, like this deal. They didn't have that. I think they had to have far more specific instruction than maybe we need. The other half of that is Paul is reluctant to put down absolutes. This in chapter 6 is one of those examples. But let's be careful. One, he says that behavior is not acceptable in the church. Okay. What if the guy had said, "You're right, I'm wrong. I'm going to stop it right now"? What do you think Paul would have said?
Good.
Yeah. So does that imply that somebody has tried to get this guy to see they've been sending him anonymous letters, slipping notes under his door? Why was this necessary for the congregation? You're guessing here, I understand that, but.
Maybe they can all learn from this, for one thing.
Okay, say more.
Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking for myself, I learn best when I make a mistake or I'm not doing things the right way.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe they can learn from others' mistakes. I don't know.
Well, one of the things, that talked about in 5 is also talked about in chapter 4, and that is there was some arrogance or boastfulness, is one of the terms used.
Puffed up.
Yeah, puffed up, yeah, in the Corinthians, that somehow, now that they were Christians, they were above all of this normal stuff, and, and he has to deal with that, and he's dealing with that all the way through this letter.
Trying to get them more humble and back to relying on God and God's word. I don't know. I'm just searching.
Well, it's hard to be boastful and be humble, and humility is always a better, if you're spending all your time bragging and basking in your glory, you're probably in the wrong end of the meter.
What is it, pride before the fall?
Yeah. So the things that Paul confronts here is, how did they get so creative in screwing up in so many different ways in such a short amount of time? I mean, it's just, talking about a large group of people here. We had no real idea of what the numbers were, but, maybe in dozens, we're not talking about 500 people or 10,000. Most of our churches could have held that congregation on Easter, not that they had Easter services then, but, in other words, it's a very primitive beginning, and it's like, they must have gotten these people from every imaginative corner, because it's like they were really working at finding stuff to do. Most times when, what a well-trained interim would tell a congregation is that in the time I'm with you, we can address one or two problems in the church, but that's about as many as we can. And most churches have 1 to 5 problems, and a problem may be the debt is eating us up and we can't do anything except talk about that, or we've got a couple of people that are just driving everybody crazy, or the building, we're getting older and the congregation's getting small, the problem. And they may be structural, they may be personal, they may be relational, they may be practical. But there are only so many of those that a person can deal with. So Paul has got an encyclopedia full of them. It's rather astounding.
It's interesting to me in the end of chapter 4, he says, what do you want me to do when I arrive? Do you want me to be hard on you or to be kind and gentle? I think we already know.
Well, and there is in this letter the evidence that, like in this case, in chapter 5, I shouldn't even have to bother to write about this. And because you should have done something about it. Others, this is pretty obvious, you don't get it. So let me explain. And some of it is, we bring so much of the world into the church with us that we don't realize how unholy it is. And when we get to the part about the Lord's Supper, it's a prime example of that. They had a potluck dinner. Everybody bring, and so everybody did is they brought their picnic basket. And they didn't even got into potluck. Potluck is you share, right? Put everybody out and everybody share. No, they get out their basket and they sit down and eat. And then you'd show up just having slipped away from the master's house, finishing your duties as a maid, and come maybe with a scrap of bread, and and you're over there eating, and they're up there passing out caviar, And he's going, this is not what happens when the body of Christ comes together. We look at that and go, well, I don't have any problem with that. Sure, that's obvious, but it wasn't obvious.
Sounds like they just rely too much on themselves and looked out for number one and weren't going to.
And I think that's a very good point, and I think you should get a star. So, not knowing that much about how Greek civilization was, but assuming they're human beings, that part's safe. It is our natural instinct to deal with self-preservation, right? If we don't look out for number one, who will? There's a lot of that in this church. They don't understand community. They're not used to living for the sake of others. So when Paul talks about this, he has two concerns. how are you treating each other? Because how you treat each other is going to be how the world sees you. Because when they look at, this group here, all right, what do they see in us? If we're making light of other people, if we're putting other people down, if we don't care about anybody else, that becomes how we're known. Paul is having to condition them to understand that you're a community, and it is the community that is known. So the community has to behave differently. If you remember the end of chapter 2 of Acts of the Apostles, it talks about the 4 things that that early church did all the time. And then it goes on to say, and the Lord added daily to their number. There was something about that early Christian community that was so attractive that people could not stay away. That isn't necessarily true of us all the time. See? And that's what Paul is trying to say. He could have used the illusion of, it's the colony idea. We will plant this colony of civilization, English civilization, in the vast emptiness of North America where there's no civilization except the ones we killed off. And that will be a light to all the heathens, and they'll come unto us, and they will be saved and be good Englishmen. That really is the colonization concept. Paul and the Roman colonies were just like that. Let's be little Romes, and so Rome will be present in the world. Paul borrows that thinking. You're put here, God has you planted in Corinth because Corinth needs to know what Christianity is about. We are, American Protestants, so individualistic in our faith that we ignore the greater ramification, which is our responsibility to one another. It's almost secondary. That's why there's so many different churches. I don't like the way the organist plays. I'll go to a different church. I don't like the preacher. I'll go to a different church. I don't like the temperature they have in this. See, our religion is a personal thing, an individual thing. The sense of the corporate is too far from us. Yep.
And it says right here that we have the mind of Christ. So I think.
Yep.
Jesus didn't come to serve, to be served, but he came to serve.
Yeah. Which is part of the mystery of Christianity. We want a Savior that has so much power that can come in and change the world and make it right for me, rather than a Savior who will come and change me.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, the whole Jewish concept of Messiah is when is Messiah going to come and make the world the way it once was again, i.e. good for us?
What would Christ would have done with this man in this church, in this?
Good question.
You say Paul would. Paul was trying to make an example out of this church to be a good example to draw more people to Christianity, because that was his life. He believed, he totally believed, and was trying to spread the word to save the sinners, as we all are.
Yep.
But what would he have, how would he have felt and dealt with this situation? And it's just a question in my mind.
No, but see, the intriguing thing that's kind of our go-to answer. What would Jesus do? And then we always find a way to make it small and simple,
Well,
right? But did Jesus ever condemn a person as, Paul just calls this guy out, that is wrong, stop it, you're gone, or you're gone. When did Jesus do that?
Money changers, everybody else, the Pharisees, he wasn't. He'd point fingers.
Yeah,
Told parables.
turn the tables.
But he
I don't think he ever
always turned the
condemned, I mean, he
condemned
condemned what they were doing, but he
I think the only
didn't,
time when he's really.
I don't remember any condemnation of anybody,
That's
of their actions.
I think his condemnation, snakes and vipers, was toward the established religion,
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
establishment. But the
Yeah.
lady caught in adultery, go and sin no more. Now, she was instructed, you know, where are your accusers? They are gone, then you go and sin no more.
Yeah.
So there was always the instruction, yes, you are forgiven, but it's not, get out of jail free necessarily.
You can understand Paul doing this because this was a glaring example in his
Right.
church and the beginning of his church.
Right.
But where does he stop? I mean, he starts with this, and this is very glaring. So how far do we just keep going to the next
See, but this
little smaller sin, and then just a little smaller one?
Reading, there's some more examples coming.
I think Jesus, I mean, in doing that with the establishment, he was concerned about the Jewish leadership not caring about the other, being the wrong example. I don't know what I'm saying. I mean, where Paul is saying you are to be the perfect example, so you've got to get rid of this person, this behavior. And Jesus was always condemning the Jewish leadership because they were, I can't get it together.
They tried to use the law and
Yeah,
just
the
compound
rules,
it
the
and
rules.
put more on them,
Yeah, I think
rather
that's,
than,
yeah, I think
right?
so.
And they put themselves above everybody.
Mhm.
They were holier than thou, the
We don't do
leaders, the
that.
Pharisees.
We do
No,
this.
we're certainly, we don't do that. I'm the most humble person I know. Yeah, and by the way, that's the problem with religion. Religion is structure and order. It comes into existence because the experience, Paul comes, people respond, a church is established, and drifts. Okay, then somebody has to come back, Paul, and say, okay, what's right and wrong, what should we do and not do? And structures begin to exist. Pretty soon we'll have a liturgy to repeat every time we have the Lord's Supper. You know, and then as time goes on, we'll have officers in the church. Somebody will write a constitution. You know, we'll create a pope. You know, and religion tries to preserve an experience, an encounter, but does it for all time. That makes sense?
Yeah.
You know, the great disciple reformation of the early 1800s. We're going to create a church based on the New Testament model, and that it will be recognized as being the will of God, and everybody will join this church, and then the church will be one again. Well, that covers the disciples, the independent Christians, and the Church of Christ. So we're all one church in three branches, and we have been around for 200 years yet. So, we're doing great. Then the structure becomes, okay, how do we do that? And in creating the structure, that created the divisions. We needed to have a national organization to effectively send missionaries. No, missionaries should be paid for by congregations, state versus national. And the Church of Christ separated. And you have the deal where the missionary goes around from church to church collecting money so they can go back to Africa and save the natives, make them Presbyterians because they're
I think we're
already
making this
Catholics.
too hard. I like on day 4 when we were in chapters 2 and 3, and I really liked your commentary here saying that, Paul was talking about the discussion on wisdom. What is human nature should no longer be our nature. We're not mere humans, we're children of God, and as such, the Spirit of God enables us to know God's will. The key verse in 2:16, we have the mind of Christ. That is, Christ was able to know God's will, so we too, as recipients of that same Spirit, know what God's will is. Instead of us wishing we could know more, let us simply start using what God has already made so clear to us. I mean, do we have to have all these laws and all these examples of sin? And when do you kick somebody out, or when, if you've accepted the Holy Spirit, don't we in our gut know what is right and wrong? Are we back to being the Jewish leaders and making Deuteronomy all over again? I don't know.
But and maybe it's a result of being Americans that are conditioned to be individualistic. I've had this experience, well, you've seen it. Somebody goes off and has a religious experience, right? And you can tell, whatever it was great. And then, at about the 12th time that they tell you the story and how they want you to do the same thing, it repulses you. Because what's being held up is, this is the thing you've got to have. If you haven't done this, then, I was so close to you, but you aren't. Does that make sense? When I find the light, I need to find some place where everybody's light is like mine, or then I feel it's being called into question. Rather than saying, it was obvious you had a great experience and I'm happy for you.
I think it's interesting with Emmaus, the walk of Emmaus, which that can happen.
That's what came to
Right,
my
because you
mind.
have this wonderful experience this weekend. But they don't leave it there.
Yep.
I mean, it's written into it. I mean, it's also that there's the fourth day. And so after that wonderful weekend, then you would get small groups and you meet again, which helps you figure out, what am I going to do with this experience that I had? And how do I live that out now? Rather than, I can't replicate that. I can't change the music in my church, so it makes me feel like I'm on a Emmaus walk again, But I can meet with 4 other people, and we can talk about our experiences, so that it becomes not just what happened to me, but it becomes, again, community. It's hard to be a Christian.
Well, and that again is the whole thing in Paul is culture versus Christian community. We're the same thing, There was a time when culture said Sunday is church. And whether you went to church or not, there wasn't anything else to do. Nothing was open, so, it was the Lord's Day, even if you didn't acknowledge the Lord. Now we go, oh, look how bad everything is. No, and as we say that, we're on our way to the store on Sunday or to the restaurant, and we're talking about how ungodly the community has become. Superficially, not at all, and we're a part of it, and we benefit from it, Where do we put that together?
We contribute to it.
No, sure. And it's not, see, the tendency is to say everything was better when. So if only we could go back to this, it would all be perfect. I grew up in the 50s. It was not a good time. I grew up in the 60s. It was not a good time. I do not want to go back to any of those.
Yeah.
The times I long to go back to are when I was so oblivious to what the world was like that I didn't realize there were problems.
Yeah, that's okay.
And that, growing up occurred as you realized that things that were being done or not done to people and so forth had a detrimental effect on everybody. And maybe that's our problem. We don't want to grow up. As I said in the book, as soon as somebody says change, somebody's going to say, yeah, but that requires effort. And just let it all flow down from heaven perfectly. Well, as you continue to work, one of the things, you can write in this book, or you can make notes, or you can highlight. That if that helps you find the things you want to talk about. Now, we need to decide what we're going to do about next week. Okay? Then, let's do this. You need to send me your questions, concern. Please refer to the day. Like on day 5, you said, or I disagree with, so I can find it. And what I will do is I will get with Kathy, and at some point, like on Monday or Tuesday, we'll film the deal and put it on. That way you can, and if you don't ask anything, then you don't get nothing. Just run the tape for 30 minutes, I want to go back to one thing that I said in the service. How many of you have more than one Bible? Okay. And of course, when you're reading something like this, you go through all the different Bibles. Sometimes you do. Well, yeah.
2 maybe.
I would really recommend Peterson's The Message, because Paul is difficult
I
to
was looking
read.
at Deanna when you
I know, I
were
got
in
you.
the sanctuary.
That's what I read.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
what
right?
she reads, huh?
And
It's because it's down to my level.
when I do it like this, I'm going, I don't understand this, but this I can. And Peterson is not writing at a elementary level. But you got to understand, that's how Peterson understands this. And since he agrees with me, I know he's right. But I mean, yeah. But Paul's style of writing, is we're going into a whole different mindset when we get to Paul. You didn't have this trouble understanding the Gospels, right? Their story, their narrative. Here he's dealing with philosophy, and this is not easy stuff to deal with. So I think it's a great companion. I did one of these studies on Romans, and I started on and said, oh my God, I can't even understand. And I got Peterson, and I went, I got this. Yeah, I mean, it's that nice and done. So,
But online, you can get it online,
yeah.
Bible Gateway.
Are you familiar with BibleGateway.com?
I want a book in front of me.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, good. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Now, are these in-
Not here, but in there.
Kids want to share it.